Hello folks, I'm back again. Had some time to do another video. It's been busy since moving and having my son and stuff, but found some time to do this video for you. Anyway, we're going to talk about what I talked about before in the last post I did, which was the Phrygian Dominant mode. It's the fifth mode of the Harmonic Minor scale. And if what I mean by the fifth mode, it's basically if you go from 1 and count up to 5 and you start on that note, that's the fifth mode of the harmonic minor scale. So, but I hate to think of stuff like that, because if you just go mode 5 and people don't really know how to relate to the scale, so they come up with names for these things, and this one that I'm talking about today is called Phrygian Dominant mode. Now the difference between, there's only one note difference between the Phrygian Dominant mode and the Phrygian mode. And basically the Phrygian mode is mode 3 of the parallel major scale, if you want to call it that, and the scale formula for the Phrygian scale is 1 flat 2 flat 3 4 5 flat 6 and flat 7. Now the Phrygian Dominant mode chord scale of the sequence is basically 1 flat 2 3 4 5 flat 6 and flat 7. So the difference between the two is basically, instead of playing the flatted third or the minor third, you're playing a major third in this case. So instead of, I'm talking in this in G because we've talked about this in G forever, and just to relate everything to one key center for now, and then you can transpose it as you go along. So basically I'll play G Phrygian, and then I'll play G Phrygian Dominant mode for you. Here's G Phrygian. So on this one, there's still the flat 2. The flat 2 is pretty dominant, pretty characteristic of this minor sounding mode, and I'm calling it minor sounding because of the minor third. Now I'm going to play the Phrygian Dominant, which basically gets rid of that minor third and then puts in its place a major third. So here's G Phrygian Dominant. In this case, basically in this particular instance on this scale, there's a minor third interval in there, which is in most of the other scales unrelated to harmonic minor, you won't have the minor third interval. Besides, you just won't. So that's what makes the harmonic minor scale unique, is that minor third sequence in that scale. But in this instance, basically in the Phrygian, like I said, Phrygian Dominant is mode 5 of harmonic minor, but I'm relating it to, it's a better related chord scale, which is the Phrygian, and hence the name Phrygian Dominant. And they call it Phrygian Dominant because the one chord in the Phrygian mode, if you can think back, if not, go back and watch the videos, the one chord is a minor 7 chord in the Phrygian mode. in a minor 7th arpeggio. In this instance, that one chord actually turns dominant because you're now in a chord tone. The one chord is the scale formula, has a chord thing of 1, 3, 5, 7, and the minor would be a 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7. In this case, the third do is raised up to its major counterpart, being B instead of B flat. So, hopefully I'm not confusing you too much, then that the one chord is now dominant 7 because the new notes are GB, GB, or G, B, D, and F instead of B flat. That's the G minor with the B flat and then the dominant 7. Raising that B flat up the B. So in that case, so also in that instance, there's some more chord tones that change within the Phrygian Dominant framework to fit the Harmonic Minor chord scale relationship. And I believe I talked about that previously, and you can look back at that. But basically, it's like you're taking a Harmonic Minor chord scale and starting it on the 5th position of that thing. So basically, G Phrygian Dominant is the 5th mode of C Harmonic Minor, if that'll help you out. But thinking about it as just standalone G Phrygian Dominant, I think helps a lot of ways in creating chord tones and riffs. Anyway, so the next, so you'll have a G dominant 7. Now the flat 2 chord in this instance, the 3rd tone that was altered is not present in that chord. So that 2 chord, the flat 2 chord in this instance, but sometimes people don't say the flat or but it's the 2 chord of this scale would be A flat major 7, right? Right, okay. Now the 3 chord in the instance of Phrygian would be a flat 3 dominant 7, right? So it would be B flat dominant 7 in this case, in the case of Phrygian. Now the thing is, we got to raise that B flat note up a half step to B, and so the only thing you do is swap that root note here and just change your fingers around, and then you make a diminished 7th chord. That's a pretty common move when you're voice leading and up to the 1 chord now. So anyway, so you go the B flat dominant 7 is now B diminished 7th to the new 4 chord, and then in Phrygian the 4 chord was a minor 7th chord, but the 4, right, has that altered 7th or that altered 3rd from G in there, because the 3rd is now the 7th of the new chord, so that's raised up. So instead of being C minor 7, you got C minor major 7 here to include the B flat, the change. To go from B flat to B. That's the 4 minor from Phrygian to the 4 minor major 7 in the Phrygian Dominant mode. Now the 5 chord is the same whether it's Phrygian or whether it's Phrygian Dominant, because the one note you change doesn't affect that chord, so it's still a 5 minor 7 flat 5 in this instance. Next, the next chord is going to be altered. In its regular form, it would be a what are we saying, flat 6, right? Major 7. For Phrygian, it'd be a flat 6 major 7. But you altered one of the chord tones in this, raising up. In this case, it'd be the 5th, right? And you're raising it up a half step. So now you're going to be playing E flat, and they call that E flat. They call it sometimes E flat 7, major 7 augmented, or you can call it E augmented major 7, or but some people just mostly call it E major 7 sharp 5, because it has the 5th, and E flat would be B flat in a normal case, but instead it's B, so it's a sharp 5. The next chord in the scale is unaltered between Phrygian, or whether it's Phrygian or Phrygian Dominant. The chord stays the same as a flat 7 minor 7 chord. So still and back to the dominant 7 chord. So that's the chord scale. Basically what I told you there is the relationship between the Phrygian mode and the Phrygian Dominant mode. And I'm trying not to make people think about it too much, but the chord scale relationships between the two can lead you to understanding what makes that scale unique between, well, if I just use Phrygian, I don't need Phrygian Dominant because it's not going to change the sound in it at all. But it is. And for that instance was that minor 3rd interval that was in that G Phrygian Dominant. Now granted, some of the chord progressions that you typically played for the Phrygian mode would work for Phrygian Dominant. The only thing would be you could not play that flatted 3rd chord, for instance, in this case. You could just go like that if you just wanted, and then in that instance you could actually play both scales over the thing, and it would be valid. You're playing just basically a 1 power chord to a flat 2 power chord to the flat 7 power chord back to the 1. So in that case, I kind of played both, and it kind of fit either one. But say you wanted a chord progression to emphasize the change that you saw, then and in a lot of these things, they don't play the dominant 7th chord. In typical rock music, let's just say, they wouldn't play only on a blues thing, but that was a different context. But they wouldn't typically play the major 7. They could play a major chord, right? Like we talked about earlier. get into the having the third in there, it jacks with the, well, my pictures got leaving, I hate that. When you put the third in there, it kind of jacks with the harmonies a little bit. So, you know, 5 power chords are pretty good because it's either major or minor. It doesn't matter. But in this case, if you wanted to play the thirds and stuff, a good chord is a slash chord. And if you go back to on Lefty Guitar Trader, I had a kind of a rhythm on there for the Phrygian Dominant where I basically used a G, basically, what are they calling that? Yeah, so it's basically, it's G with the B and the bass going to the C on that case. So I'm like, so basically I'm going to the 1, right? So that's a pretty frequent chord. I'd call that chord transition or voice leading per se, is that you throw that, you invert that major third. Instead of going like this, you're going, but in rock music they inverted it and put the third in the bass. Sounds more beefy because you're voice leading on that bass note. Anyway, so yeah, the chord change would be a 1 to flat 2. Let me move my picture here. Yeah, so I went from a 1 to the flat 2 down to the flat 7, and then I did that. So basically I'm kind of going back to the 1 here, but I'm transitioning up to the 4 chord to get that B in there, because the B note is very important in this case, because if it was just Phrygian, I'd be B flat. It doesn't have as much emphasis in that case, right? Because so something like that. You can come up with your own, but I'll tell you what, within the harmonic minor scale, you'll see that chord progression. You'll see that used a lot. Yngwie uses that a lot in his, he uses a lot of Phrygian Dominant modes and harmonic minor itself, but Phrygian mode, dominant mode, he plays a lot. So but like I was saying, you don't have to play the, in a rock context, they're probably not going to be playing you know what I'm saying, and then go to, because it just doesn't sound good with the distortion on there, you know. Plus that dominant chord really doesn't sit well as a 1, but it works in blues, but in this case it kind of doesn't really want to stay there. So you make it 5 power chords. So that was Phrygian Dominant mode. It's mode 5 of harmonic minor. And I talked about harmonic minor before. There's other modes in harmonic minor, but you know, you're gonna have to look those ones up. Like I said, the Guy's Grids book that I got here. Hold on. This kind of goes through all of them. Yeah, right there. Voila. Opened it right up to the 5th mode, Phrygian Dominant scale. That's pretty amazing. I'm talking about it now. But, yeah, they basically tell you the harmonized, along the top, they give you the harmonized scale formula and then a harmonized scale that I just discussed with you. And then you can go through and figure out all the other modes. It's like a la carte, you know, with these. Some of these are better than others. Let's just put it that way. But it takes you some getting used to. The modes of melodic minor are a little more useful in this case. But I'm not saying I haven't explored all the modes of harmonic minor, but that's on each individual person's thing. I'm just trying to give you some framework to start that journey. Anyway, and like I said, Guy's Grids, like I've been touting before, has all the modes of the major scale. It's got the pentatonic scales in there, arpeggios. Get this book. It's cheap, really. Like I tout about it over and over again, and I'll keep telling you to get this book. I wish I had this book when I started. My teacher was good, but this is pretty laid out. But I didn't know as much as I did then, but it really helps laying it out that way. So anyway, until next time, this is me signing off, and I'm just reiterating. There's a point in music, like I said, the Phrygian mode is a minor sounding mode because it has the minor third in it, and then I go in and talk about Phrygian Dominant and has a major third in there. Well, there comes a point in music when the stuff starts to break down, and they come out of names out of usefulness rather than some made-up term, you know. They try to relate a lot of the altered chord tones to its parallel mode in the major scale, like Phrygian Dominant. I can kind of remember that. I just got to, instead of playing that flat at third, I can play the natural 3, and I'll have Phrygian Dominant rather than going Phrygian Dominant 5th mode Harmonic Minor, right? So they start to, and if you think about it in terms of relating to the parallel modes, you get it in your head a lot better, because the differences are little but subtle. But, well, in this case, that major third or minor third, the major third in that makes that minor third half like step. It's basically a hole and a half, right? A hole and a half step between it. And to play these things, you know, some people, I try and stick to a framework of with the fingers, but sometimes on these harmonic minor chords it's kind of impossible to fret them. In this case, what I'd normally play with 1, 3, 4 kind of becomes cumbersome, so I just use the 3 and 2 to play those adjacent notes. In that instance, because it's just easier to play. that way. So you can experiment with different finger combinations. I'm not holding anybody at this game of what fingers to use. I'm just trying to get you a possible framework to go with. So, and like I said in the thing, take this stuff in small chunks. It can be hard to digest, and you learn this stuff over years. You don't learn this stuff in weeks. Let's just put it that way. But try not to get too confused over it, and if you get frustrated, just stop for a little bit, and like I said, go back to the modes. If you can relate to the major and you really know the major scales, or in this case major sounding modes and the minor sounding modes, and you can really relate to those, it makes it a lot easier when you're transitioning to the more other altered scale like harmonic minor and melodic minor. Anyway, next time we'll talk about melodic minor. I'll see you later. I'm going to shut this off now.